Welcome to this new episode of my podcast, A Digital Tomorrow. It is my absolute pleasure today to welcome Mr. Richard Turrin. Welcome, Richard.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. Well, I'm delighted to be here. And I know we're going to have an exciting conversation because our pre-conversation before he hit the record button was a good one.
Yes, I fully agree. I think it's going to be an amazing discussion. Well, for all of you listeners who might not know Richard yet, even though I think that most of you already know him, but just in case. Well, you know, Richard is the innovation best-selling author of Cashless, China's Digital Currency Revolution, and also Innovation Lab Excellence, two amazing books that I actually recommend you all to read. He's also an Analytica Top 100 FinTech influencer and an award-winning executive. Previously, he heading fintech firms at IBM, following a 20-year career in investment banking. He's been living in Shanghai for the last decade, experiencing China's shift towards becoming a much more cashless country in first hand. So once again, Richard, welcome to A Digital Tomorrow. It's a pleasure, as I said before.
Wonderful to be here. And you're right. The thing that I think I bring to is that I actually lived through the transition in China where we had cash to the point where we went cashless. It was a really big transition.
Indeed, I can imagine. I mean, China is far ahead, like many other countries in that sense. Before moving, though, to this area of talking about cashless, I would like to ask you a bit about your personal experience and especially about your book. No, I mean, why do you think your book, Cashless, is such an interesting read for anyone trying to understand more about how China's payments environment works and Digital Yuan and all these topics? Why is it so interesting and relevant?
Yeah, that's absolutely the best question to really start with, because there's some people who may be listening in and they're thinking, I don't care about China. China's far away. What does China have to do with me? And it's real clear. Ready? What happened in China is about a decade advance of what happens in fintech in the West. So if you want to know the future of fintech in the West and what it's going to look like, what it's going to do to banks, what it's going to do to your business, look at China. That's the example. And it's really wonderful because today there's the best example ever. WhatsApp, the Facebook app, started using on a limited rollout the Novi wallet to pass stable coins for payment. And, you know, that's maybe new to somebody who is in the West, but anybody who looks at WeChat Pay knows that WhatsApp is simply copying what WeChat did. So, you know, there's no secret why Facebook is doing this, why WhatsApp is playing with this. And if you look at China and you know what happened there, you can see the future in the Europe and the US. So follow China for that crystal ball that gets you to the future.
Well, thank you very much. Actually, I fully agree with you, but I know that some people in the West might argue here that perhaps copying China might not be that good in the sense that China's, as you know, economic system is very different from that in the West. No, so to the point that perhaps the solutions provided by China today might not be the ones that we will be using in the future, precisely because of this different economic system. So what would you say to these people or commentators who might argue that?
Sure. And it's really simple. The political systems are very different. We don't want to go into that, but that's obvious, right? But the way a bank works, the way that money transfers, it's pretty much the same in China as it is in the United States or Europe. Now, I'm not saying that people in the US and EU will use WeChat Pay or Alipay. I'm not suggesting that they are going to be the primary payment platforms. But what I would suggest is that whatever the name of the payment system that you get, whether it's central bank digital currency, whether it's some payment app, what's going to happen is your relationship with money, once you go cashless, will be similar to that relationship that China has with money. So the companies are going to be different. Some of the underlying technology may be a little bit different, but the relationship and how you live your life will be similar to how people live their lives going cashless here in China today.
So why do you think, for example, that people in China are much more cashless than people in other Asian countries? Because I know that we tend to think that Asia is going cashless, but when you compare China with, let's say, for example, Japan, we see that people in China tend to be much more cashless. So why is that? I mean, why do you think there is this kind of difference between these countries?
Oh, real easy. You have to think in terms of what big tech can do if it gets into the payment business. And oftentimes you'll hear people say, well, what if Amazon had a payment platform? What if Facebook had a payment platform? And yes, they're getting there with WhatsApp, as I mentioned before. But the reality is in 2014, WeChat, which is owned by Tencent, and Alibaba's Alipay both got banking licenses and were both allowed to go into the payment business here in China. And that was huge because this is the equivalent of saying Amazon go into payment and WeChat is more or less equivalent to Facebook or Twitter, sort of, a little bit of both. But the point is, big tech in China went into payment and they revolutionized the industry. So often we think about how powerful is big tech if they are unleashed. And big tech was unleashed in the payment space, and they changed payment in all of China. No question. This is just the strength of big tech.
No, I fully agree with you. And actually, now that you mentioned big tech, I wanted to talk about Techfin a bit, because you mentioned WeChat Pay, Alipay. So many people in the West got a bit surprised last year with all that and Group's IPO thing. I mean, there were like lots of discussions here in the West, and I actually saw lots of misinformation. So since you're in Shanghai, I wanted to hear from you, like what exactly happened and why. I mean, first of all, is there any actual crackdown on Techfin firms in China? And regardless of how we call it, why do you think China is doing that? Like, is it like with the aims of making this market much stronger, actually? Or what do you think about this whole topic? Because I know there was a lot of misinformation, so I wanted to clarify this with you.
Absolutely. It's a great question, and I have a couple of chapters on this. Let me try to make this as short as possible. And many people are looking at the IPO cancellation from a year ago, and people are looking at the current changes in regulation as China destroying or breaking its tech industry. And that couldn't be further from the truth. What China is fundamentally doing is changing the relationship that big tech has with society. And I don't argue that it's disruptive, and I don't argue that it's hit. Obviously, Ant hit them hard. But the point is not to break everything. The point is to make society and big tech relate with one another so that in years to come, there'll be even more room for big tech and even more room for innovation and more room for smaller companies to grow up. So now let's look specifically at Ant very quickly. Okay, so you have to understand how important Ant is to China. Ant and WeChat carry 94% of mobile payments in China. The total mobile payment market is 4 times China's GDP. To give you a comparison, credit cards in the United States are about 1/3 of the US's GDP. So,
a
that's
big
how
difference.
big
Yes,
this is.
yes,
So
yes.
there's 2 points that we have to really remember. One is that Ant had been unregulated and is now clearly too big to fail. It is a systemically important organization. That's number one. And the second thing we have to look at is leverage and credit leverage. And remember that China in 2017 closed the doors on its P2P or peer-to-peer loan scandal, which cost $120 billion total. People were protesting in the streets. It was a horrible episode. In fact, the best example of fintech gone bad. So 2017, China was closing the doors on this. And in 2020, we were looking at the Ant IPO. And the Ant IPO was predominantly built on credit. And the regulators were very concerned about the amount of credit and building another credit bubble in China. Now, for those out there who are saying, no, Rich, you got it all wrong. It's very common to hear people say, well, Jack Ma gave a speech in the Shanghai Forum, and the regulators didn't like the content of the speech, and therefore they canceled the IPO. Now, Jack Ma is the richest guy and one of the richest guys in China at the time, super connected. Do you think you can pick? He either went there and days before his IPO intentionally insulted all of the regulators who were in the room, or he went there and plead with them and made impassioned pleas because he knew what was going on. So if you want, you can say he's completely clueless and he went in there and insulted everybody, or B, he's the most well-connected guy in China, knew what was going on. And if you really read between the lines of what he says, he's begging them not to overregulate him. You pick it. My choice is that the explanation you hear every day where he went in and he insulted everybody is BS. It's easy for people to wrap their hands around. People get to say, oh yeah, China's regulators are really bad guys. That makes people feel comfortable. But I'm sorry, it just didn't play that way. And you don't think that for 1 second that Jack Ma is a dumb guy, okay?
Well, I mean, I guess that explanation suits many more people, so that's why it's kind of become like the dominant one. And I also think that you mentioned before the idea of over-regulating, and that's very interesting because people claim all the time that China is over-regulating this Techfin and fintech area, but at the same time, when I started doing like economic research on China, I didn't start with fintech, but I started with shadow banking, which, you know, it's not such a huge issue right now compared to what it was like maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But still, I mean, it's been quite of an issue in China for this past maybe like 15, 20 years. And when I was actually doing research on that area, researching like wealth management products, P2P platforms, I realized that there was actually a clear lack of regulation, no, in that area, like a huge lack of regulation. So that's why I find it kind of misleading and misguiding when people keep saying that China is like trying to overregulate this area because China overregulates everything, because that's not actually true. I mean, I know there may be areas where there is overregulation, same as in any other country, but at the same time, there are other areas where actually the problem was the opposite, no? Such as shadow banking and even Techfin before. So that's why I think we need to go like on a case-by-case basis rather than just making statements. No, that's what I feel.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very fond of saying that most of China's big tech, not just fintech, but almost all of the big tech in the last decade grew up in what is called the Wild West. They basically were very, very lightly regulated until literally the trigger or the starting point would be the Ant IPO, where the government said, hey, big tech companies are monopolies. They are buying too many smaller tech companies. They are stopping innovation. And you can look at Google, Apple, Facebook, great companies in the West, but not as innovative as they had been many years earlier, because when they get so big, the innovation goes down. All right. And the Chinese regulators looked at it all and they said, Wild West days are over. You're now systemically critical organizations. You're now using algorithms to underpay employees in the case of some of the rideshare and the fast delivery companies. And there were problems that really needed to be resolved. Wild West days to now regulated days, whether you want to call it heavily regulated, I think is a stretch. But I will say this, it was like going from zero regulation to some in a hurry. It was dramatic. I won't say that it wasn't. It was, but certainly not over-regulated. And the thing to watch is that much of the regulation has a focus on bringing more innovation to China, because China needs that innovation to boost its GDP. That's where its growth is going to come from, innovation.
No, I agree, and I think what you said now makes perfect sense. You mentioned that it was dramatic because we went from zero regulation to like maybe not a lot, but quite a lot of regulation. But the thing is, maybe that the problem was that before we had like zero regulation. No? So I think the problem was in there,
yeah.
in starting from zero rather than starting from a much better position.
Yeah, and that led to the explosive growth of WeChat and Alipay, and going cashless in China, and that was a period that was genuinely positive for China because it grew digitally very quickly. But everything ends. You don't want to have that Wild West growth forever. It's not good It's not good for society. If you are building a highly digital society, which is very clear, China through 5-year plans is very clear about this, that's what they want to do, then having this unregulated digital companies doesn't balance societal needs with corporate needs very well. And that's the goal of these regulations, to create that balance.
Yes, I fully agree with you. And before moving to Digital Yuan, which of course is a big topic, I wanted to ask you, why do you think that China is creating such a good environment for innovation? Because it's not just China going cashless. No, it's all the GBA, Shenzhen becoming this new Silicon Valley, the Silk Road Initiative. No, I mean, there are like so many areas where China is excelling, or areas that China is trying to use to become much more digital, much more innovative. So why is that happening? No, I mean, how come that everything is converging to that point?
Very, very simple, because if we go back to the 2012, the 12th 5-year plan, which is a decade ago now, and if we go even a little further before that, what we see is a realization by the government that the only way that China could manage 1.4 billion people and provide them with services, provide them with banking, provide them with different government services, is to go digital. It was seen, okay, the best analogy is the Chinese did the same thing as the US did in the 60s. In the 60s, the US had the space race. And I know about it because I was a science student when I was a kid, grew up in the 60s in the US. I lived through it. And there was a government program to make young scientists. We need to go to the moon. We need space technology. I was a scientist. I became an engineer, in part because of that. Okay. China did the same thing. It said, hey, we need more science technology. Tech is the way we're going to go forward. Tech is a critical component to society and to our growth. And it was because of this government push that digital became a critical cornerstone of China's society and of their GDP growth, contributing about 1% GDP growth annually from around roughly 2014 all the way up to around 2020, when it started to go down to 0.8, 0.9. But you grow China's GDP by a full percent, That's a lot.
No, that's true. That's true, and that's something that I mean, anyone can see. It's not just about checking the stats, which is true that you mentioned now. But aside from that, I remember when I was in Hong Kong, for example, like crossing the border and going to Shenzhen and seeing all those huge malls where like so many people play those VR games, or seeing like everyone being so cashless compared to Europe and also to Hong Kong to some extent, because I think that Hong Kong is still a bit less cashless than the mainland. No, so that's
Sure.
why I think that's something that aside from checking, of course, the GDP and this kind of stats, just by going there and visiting those places like Shenzhen or the rest of China in person, you actually realize that very quickly.
Yeah, it's a revolution. Look, this brings us to digital yuan. Going cashless is one of many technological innovations that have been launched in China in this past 7 or 8 years. Okay, so it's one of many, as we talk about. But cash is and payment is the root of society. So going cashless, enabling free and immediate cashless payment from you to me or me to somebody, that did a tremendous job at bringing digital innovation into society and making it penetrate and go deeper than credit cards, deeper than the payment systems that you're familiar with today if you live in the EU or the US, for example. So the payment system, Alipay and WeChat Pay, both of them helped make China go cashless. And now China is taking the next step, saying, okay, that amount of cashless is great. We can make China even more cashless. We can build cashless payment even more deeply in society. And they're going to do that with China's central bank digital currency, also known as the Digital Yuan, or also known as a CBDC. So I say it quickly. So that's where China's going.
Exactly. No, I mean, it's great that you mentioned that because as we spoke before starting our recording, digital yuan is probably my main area of interest and research right now. I've been writing a lot about this topic, and so have you, of course. I mean, look at your book now. So I just wanted to say to our listeners, whenever I'm teaching about central bank digital currencies or CBDCs, I normally say that CBDCs may have like different purposes, such as, for example, replace physical cash, or fight financial crime much more efficiently, or be used for monetary policy purposes. But when it comes to digital yuan, I feel like, at least to me, one of the main advantages that it will offer China, and I think that China has realized that as well, of course, looking at how they've been reacting these last few months, is how it's going to allow China to make its yuan become much more international, to make it become much more used in international trade. So I wanted to hear from you on that area. I mean, how and why China is trying to internationalize its yuan through the digital yuan, and what role can it play in the future, like let's say in the Silk Road Initiative or RCEP free trade area? Do you think it's actually going to some extent challenge the US dollar's current position? What do you think about this fascinating area?
Look, these are fabulous questions. So let me start with one brief thing. I want to make sure that everybody out there does not believe this. Okay, so many will read that China is creating or launching its digital yuan as a way of killing off WeChat and Alipay, right? That they're going to somehow fight. And let me prove to you that is not the case. WeChat Pay and Alipay launched in 2014, and 2014 was the same year that the People's Bank of China, the central bank, launched its Digital Currency Research Institute. So China has been researching a digital currency since way back in 2014. It's not that they came up with the idea all of a sudden because WeChat and Alipay were, quote, too successful. All right, so the concept that CBDC was designed to kill WeChat and Alipay is patently not true. What CBDC was designed to do is to go places that WeChat and Alipay could never go. Mm-hmm. So what you should look to with China's central bank digital currency is, for example, JD.com starting to pay salaries of employees in digital currency. Or you should look at an example, a test case where one of the commodities exchange started to make large, high value, $100,000, $200,000 US plus transactions in digital currency as a means of free and immediate payment. No bank fees on any of this. That's great, okay? And the third thing that the digital yuan was designed to do is, again, go where WeChat Pay and Alipay couldn't go, and that is to be an international version of the RMB or the yuan, to be used in trade between countries that trade with, or trading companies that trade with China. So what does that mean? It means that what you will eventually see is that instead of making a purchase in US dollars, because oftentimes when people buy, a container of refrigerators, that's my favorite example, why I don't know. So if you are in an African country and you're buying a container of refrigerators from China, you generally take your local currency, convert it to dollars, and then those dollars get converted into RMB, and you've got two foreign exchange points where you've got to pay, right? Banks take commission for that. And there's, of course, time. And what you're going to see is that same container of refrigerators bought digitally using the digital RMB, and the local trader will have to go from local currency through a central bank, make the conversion into digital RMB. That'll all happen pretty much on your computer or on your phone immediately. And then you can pay for your container immediately. So a process that used to have two steps in weeks or days in between to transfer the money and get everybody agreeing on the right amounts, right? All of that is going to happen digitally within a matter of minutes. So the idea is that the digital yuan will go places neither Alipay or WeChat could, and this is going to impact trade with Belt and Road Initiative countries and with the RCEP or RCEP countries, Regional Comprehensive Economic Plan, I think is the acronym. I always mess it up. I'm sorry.
Partnership.
Partnership. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. That's.
Yeah.
I always get it wrong.
I know it's a very long name, and I can. I mean, it makes sense.
So BRI and RCEP countries are all going to be using the digital yuan to some degree in the future, and that will, of course, not replace the dollar, but diminish and displace some dollar use in trade. Will it be a disaster? No. Will it be significant for Washington? Yes, they should be concerned about this.
Actually, I mean, there is one thing that many people ask me whenever I participate in webinars about this topic. And to be honest, sometimes I don't actually know that well what to answer to that. And that question is, why didn't the West react faster to that? Because when it comes to CBDC projects, aside from the Bahamas and Cambodia, China is the first major economy in trying to deploy its digital yuan, which is actually going to be deployed very soon, no? by the Winter Olympic Games. But the thing is, it's not something that happened overnight. I mean, China started to do research on this topic, as you said before, in 2014. So it means there's been enough years for other countries, especially, European Union, US, Canada, to kind of realize that there was a potential in there. And also from their point of view, a threat coming from China. So I don't know why these countries didn't start to react until March 2021 or so. I don't know why it took them so slow. I mean, it's hard for me to give an answer to that because I really...
I agree. It's but I have an answer for you, and it's going to be very interesting. Remember before I was mentioning the story about how Tencent and Alibaba both got these banking licenses back in 2014. Remember, China did that at the expense of their state-owned banks. So, if you're giving banking licenses to the two big techs, right? Who does that impact? It impacts the banks, which are state-owned. But the thing is, the regulators in China were smart. They said, look, we understand that the state banks are going to feel some impact. They couldn't predict how successful it would eventually be, but they knew that it would be an impact. But they thought that societal benefit was paramount to the bank's profits. And frankly, in the West, it's very hard to imagine the Federal Reserve saying, well, this new technology is good for everybody, and if it hurts bank profit margins, we're not going to worry about that so much. That's sort of funny to even think about it. It's, the West thinks about maintaining the status quo and keeping banks and incumbent organizations in their place. Better not to touch anything or to change anything, which is why the US and the EU have both suffered, because you have neither a CBDC. Yes, EU is getting one, but you've been behind in both.
Yes, but it's going to take too many years. I mean, it's not going to be a reality like maybe until 4 years from now. So that's too slow.
Right. But there's another technology that China and Australia and Singapore and India have used, which is real-time gross settlement system for retail payments. So while India launched this 6-7 years ago, and while China had a form of it through WeChat and Alipay, Australia, Singapore, a bunch of other countries have this, EU and the US have both lacked this intermediate technology, which made payments free and fast. Why? Because nobody wants to touch the banking system. And I apologize, I'm not trying to sound radical. It's actually quite factual, and I can go into more details of how you can show this through central bank policy. But that's the sad truth.
I agree. So, I mean, it's been a very interesting discussion. Before wrapping this up, I would like to ask you, I mean, since I've always been like an advocate for the cooperation between China and the West, rather than trying to promote its differences and its fights. I mean, I always try to see how we can collaborate, because there is like much room for improvement. So I would like to ask you, like, what can the West learn from China, or maybe should I say, in what areas do you think that China and the West could like cooperate right now efficiently, especially when it comes to tech? Like we spoke about 5G like a while ago. So what areas do you think there could be good for seeing this kind of cooperation and instead of a fight?
Look, that's a really wonderful question, and the basic answer is simple. Foundational technologies, and the foundational technologies of today are artificial intelligence, 5G, Internet of Things, and probably a few more that I'm I could go into biotech and other stuff that's sort of out of my area, but those are sort of the three big ones. And I think that there's lots of room for the US to work with China in not 5G, but in 6G, so that they cooperate on the standards rather than having 5G be this big political problem that it is. I don't want to go into it, but we're already seeing the standards for 6G being rolled out, and that's something that the US should cooperate with China on. AI, there's already cooperation, but there can always be more. And I think that China has fabulous AI technology that's rivaling the US. IoT is one area where China is miles ahead of the US. And the US isn't even thinking in terms of rolling out IoT as a nation the way that China is. So when I say IoT, I mean Internet of Things, and it means basically attaching devices to machines and to other places so that you can monitor or understand and get data out of your systems. And so don't think of IoT as just being in your home. Thinking about it as being a factory, so that, you know, when some product is finally produced and comes off the production line, it has a tag on it, and you pay only when your device is built. You know, I mean, you can look at a world where things are all tagged and payment and other things only happen when these tags throw off a signal. And that's the new world we're going to live into. And the US could really learn a lot about IoT from China, because this stuff is rolling out in China, and in the US, to be honest, it's not even a thought. And of course, chips are big. That's a warfare right now. I know that there's room for cooperation there, but right now that's so politically charged that I don't even want to go there. So, but yeah, there's lots of room. And to anybody who follows fintech, which is likely, I suggest to you all, look at what's happening in China. Look at what China's central bank digital currency is already doing to the marketplace for digital wallets. There's what I call the wallet wars going on now, the battle for your digital wallet. That's going to be the same in the US. You're in Europe. You're going to say, look, I can pay with CBDC. I can pay with stable coin someday. Who owns your wallet? Who's going to do that? That's the big battle. And you can see that happening in China today. So again, it's this concept that with fintech, China is showing you what the future will be in the West. And that's, you know, that's where it's at.
Well, thank you very much, Richard, for your valuable insights. It's been an actual pleasure for me to talk to you today. And I hope that all my listeners have learned from you as much as I did. And actually, I mean, there were like so many other topics that I wanted to cover with you, but there is no time, like, for example, crypto. So that's something we can do in the future, perhaps. Yes.
Next time, I'm happy to. I'm delighted to come back again. Or you look, you know your stuff. It's absolutely a pleasure to be on your show. And one quick note to everybody out there: connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter, either one. I'm on both every day. I'd love to hear from you if you've gotten this far in the podcast. Shout out, tell me what you liked or what you disagree with or what you agreed with. And of course, my book, which is over my shoulder, Cashless, is available on Amazon and Apple Books and a whole bunch of other bookstores that I don't know the name of. They're all digital, but you know, you can find it. It's out there, and I'd love for you to read it. But do reach out. That's nothing makes me happier than to hear from my listeners out there. So.
No, please do, please do. Actually, I've been following Richard for a few years, and all his insights, all his posts are actually very insightful. So please follow him and follow me as well. So, well, as I said, thank you very much, Richard, and thanks to all my listeners, and well, looking forward to seeing you in our next episodes. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Bye.